every weekend.
Next, from the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., a debate on the truth behind the 9/11 attacks. Participants include Jonathan Kay, author of Among the Truthers, A Journey Through America's Growing Conspiracist Underground, and Webster Tarpley, self-described 9/11 truth scholar and one of the people featured in Mr. Kay's book. Mr. Tarpley is the author of 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in USA. The debate is moderated by Newsweek Daily Beast contributing editor David Frum. Mr. Frum served as special assistant to President George W. Bush from 2001 to 2002. This is about an hour 40.
All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Good evening and welcome to the International Spy Museum. I'm the Executive Director, Peter Ernest, and delighted to have you all with us this evening. I think it's going to be a very stimulating evening. The agenda will be, I will introduce David Frum, who will be our moderator for this evening, and he will introduce the two main speakers. In the meantime, as a courtesy to the speakers, if you'd be kind enough to turn off your cell phones, PDAs, and whatever. Particularly this evening, we are CNN, we are streaming live. And in addition, this will be on Book TV. I can't tell you which date, but my guess is probably fairly soon. I think the subject matter is extraordinarily interesting for any number of reasons. As you know, a major part of intelligence often is simply open source reporting. And because open source reporting is getting so difficult to sort out these days, because of the proliferation of different sources, everybody's a reporter. And then you have the internet. So I hope our two speakers will help us sort some of this out. Let me just introduce our moderator, David Frum. He is the editor of FrumForum.com, and he is a CNN contributor. He's done 6 books, most recently Comeback, Conservatism That Can Win Again, 2007 Doubleday. He has regular columns for CNN.com, The Week, and Canada's National Post. He served as a special assistant to President Bush, 2001-2002. His first book, Dead Right, 1954, was described by Frank Rich of the New York Times as the smartest book written from the inside about the American conservative movement. David is from Canada, received his BA and MA simultaneously from Yale, and later graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School, where he was president of the Federalist Society. And he is a resident of Washington, so please help me welcome. Oh, let me mention before I introduce him, books by the two speakers, Among the Truthers by Jonathan Kay will be available in the back, and 9/11 Synthetic Terror by Webster Tarpley will also be available. And my understanding is both authors will remain to sign their books after the end. So please help me welcome David Frum. Thank you, David.
Peter, thank you. Peter, you omitted one fact from my biography, which is I am an avid fan of the Spy Museum and a frequent leader of tours of out-of-town guests through these halls. This is a remarkable institution, and those of you who have not spent more time here really ought to make a point of it. It is a wonderful addition to the Washington scene. It is also, I think, a marvelous illustrator of some of the iron laws of Washington bureaucracy, because soon after the opening of this museum, which is devoted to spycraft and hence to the work of the Central Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency's most important enemy, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, decided that they too needed a museum. And so there is now, thanks to you, a Law and Order Museum also in Washington, which is also a wonderful place to take friends and family. As you mentioned, I'm from Canada, which is how I know Jonathan Kay. He is my editor at the Washington Post, and he is the author of Among the Truthers. I have not had the pleasure of meeting Webster Tarpley before today. I, with you, am curious to hear what he has to say. Our topic tonight is conspiracy theories. In Jonathan, we have an analyst, and in Webster, we have a practitioner. So we will get to be able to see, where does this tendency in the human mind come from, and how do we cope with it? Man imposes meaning on the world. We see patterns. We see We look at some jam on our bread, and we see a human face. We look at the moon, and there is the man in the moon. This is an artifact of our mind, but our deep need to do this can produce results that are sometimes entertaining, sometimes kind of sinister, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Jonathan has led all of us on this amazing tour of the world of the truthers, the people who dispute the truth about what happened on 9/11, and we will have some disputation of that truth today. I think I have great confidence in the human species that while many of us are foolish, the species as a whole is wise, that human beings arrive at truth through disputation, and that in every era and every time there are wild allegations that are thrown out. They are strained away by history. And I have no doubt that will be the outcome of our process here today. And with that, let me begin with Jonathan Kay, who will speak for about 20 minutes, and then proceed to Webster Tarpley. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I admire David's confidence that the truth would emerge. After looking at the comment thread of a lot of the newspaper articles on my website, I kind of have less faith in the human capacity for reason. But I imagine that we have saner minds in the audience tonight. David is quite right when he said that humans are pattern-seeking creatures. It's pretty much the theme of my book. Humans can handle good, they can handle evil. What humans are not good at is handling chaos. And most early efforts for humans for creating religions, philosophies, was about imposing a sort of moral order on the universe. Essentially explaining the age-old question of why bad things happen to good people. And that is why monotheistic religions are so popular, because whatever happens in the world, no matter how random or miserable or agonizing it seems to be, there is some explanation, that it fits into some cosmic pattern, even if it's a pattern that we can't recognize. Now, conspiracy theories are unlike religions in the sense that conspiracy theories do not supply gods. But conspiracy theories do supply something that arguably is just as valuable. They supply demons. And when you're looking to answer the question of why do bad things happen to good people, whether it's terrorism or a financial crisis or war, demons are very useful things to have around. And if you have a conspiracy theory that finds your demon, gives it a name, then you have a very simple answer to the question of why terrorism happens, or why wars happen, or why people's businesses go bankrupt. It's because of the Freemasons, or it's because of the Illuminati, or it's because of the Zionists, or it's because of the Muslims, or it's because of the Bilderbergers, or it's because of the New World Order. As I argue in my book, the actual identity of the villain is somewhat beside the point. What matters in terms of the psychology of conspiracy theories is that all evil has a single unitary address. And although the world of a conspiracy theorist's mind can be a very dark place, it's full of evil plots and planes flying into buildings and smoke-filled rooms, in a sense, there is good news that comes out of it, which is that if evil has a name, and if evil has an address, then we can fight evil. We can uncover it. Whether it's George Bush or whether it's the United Nations, it doesn't matter. We know what evil is, we know where evil lives, and we can dedicate our lives to telling other people the truth, which is what a lot of people do on the internet. And this struggle becomes liberating for a lot of people, and it becomes somewhat utopian, because the idea is once this evil is uncovered, once the truth is known, then the world will be a better place. Now, let me get back to the book and the people I interviewed for it, including Mr. Tarpley, who was kind enough to give me his time. When I started writing my book, I interviewed a wide variety of conspiracy theorists all around the United States. And when I started off, my first questions was, what do you believe? Tell me your theory of 9/11. Or tell me your theory of how Barack Obama became president, or how the pharmaceutical companies are conspiring against us, or how the financial crisis was created, stuff like that. This turned into something of a dead end. Because when you talk to a conspiracy theorist, you ask them that open-ended question, you can end up sitting there for about 8 hours. Modern conspiracy theories tend to be extraordinarily technical. It's why I pity Mr. Tarpley. He only has 20 minutes. I'm sure he could speak for hours and hours and hours. For me, it's somewhat simpler. 'Cause I'm going to tell you all I know in 20. So that was sort of a dead end. When I talked to 9/11 conspiracy theorists, I asked them, I said, tell me what happened on 9/11. And I would get a very technical narrative about what happened with NORAD, how the Twin Towers fell, the metallurgical properties of the beams in Twin Tower 1 and 2. And after a while, I started asking a different question, which I found was much more interesting and became the basis for my book. And the question was, when did you start believing all this? When did you start believing that 9/11 was an inside job? Or when did you start believing that Barack Obama's presidency was illegitimate? And then the answers became much more interesting, because then I was getting to the root of the issue, which was, when did you lose your faith in the narrative that's being told to you by your government and by the media? When did you start to believe that the reality around us that we're being told by our media is a lie? And people told me some very interesting things. In the case of 9/11, for instance, what I found is that most people who joined the 9/11 truth movement, they didn't join it in 2001. They joined it in 2003, and in particular the spring and summer of 2003. Because when they heard there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, they asked themselves the question, if the government lied to me about that, what else is the government lying to me about? And once people ask that question, and that question becomes the guiding question of their life, they can go to some pretty dark places and go into some pretty dark rabbit holes. Now, I think it's an important question to ask. It's the very basis of my profession. I'm a journalist. And unless you do ask that question, when is the government lying to you and when is it telling the truth, there's no such thing as investigative journalism. All you have is press releases from the government. But once the idea that the government is always lying to you and the media is always lying to you becomes a sort of religious faith, then you've become a full-time conspiracy theorist. And the answers I got for when people believe this stuff is very interesting. As I say, for 9/11, it tended to be in 2003. It tended to be the lack of weapons of mass destruction. When I talked to Barack Obama conspiracy theorists, the so-called birthers, for them it tends to be right at the moment that Barack Obama became president. I mean, these are people, they were all conservatives, and the idea of America electing a liberal Democrat to the White House just caused their political faith in America to just shatter. And they became convinced that his presidency must be illegitimate in some cosmic sense. And many of them have devoted their life to proving that he is in fact an illegitimate president. There was one fellow that I interviewed, I wrote about him in chapter 1 of my book. He's a Canadian, he's of Serbian ancestry. He actually played in the NFL for the New York Jets. And he became radicalized in 1999 during the Kosovo War. And he turned on his TV, he saw images of NATO warplanes dropping bombs on Belgrade. He just couldn't believe the narrative he was hearing from the mass media, which was that the Serbians were killing Kosovar Albanians. He thought it must be an international conspiracy against Serbia. And 2 years later, 9/11, he saw the events of that day through the same conspiratorial lens. And he thought, if there was a conspiracy against Serbia in 1999, then this was some kind of inside job too. And this is a phenomenon you see over and over and over in conspiracist circles. Once they see the world through distrustful eyes and they think they're being lied to, that colors their perceptions of all subsequent events. In fact, many of the people I interviewed for my book are conspiracy theorists from the JFK era. And they just basically never stopped seeing the world as one big conspiracy. The question I get is, are there real conspiracies? I've written this book about conspiracy theories. Surely there are real conspiracies. Of course there are real conspiracies. Real life conspiracies, though, tend to be small and grubby and primarily about money and sex. Classic example in Canada, there was some, I expect no one in this room to know about this except for David, the sponsorship scandal. Sponsorship scandal was sort of the Canada's Watergate of my era, I guess. And, it was sort of a small-scale thing involving a bunch of operatives from the Liberal Party trying to buy votes in Quebec. The thing was done amateurishly. It was quickly unraveled. Everyone involved was identified. And that's more or less how conspiracies work in government, because most people in government are incompetent, or they can't keep secrets. Watergate was another classic example of a bungled amateurish operation that took place on a fairly small scale but had wide repercussions. The kind of much larger, more sinister, epic, soap opera type conspiracies like 9/11, those kind of things are completely beyond the power of incompetent government officials to pull off, even if they wanted to pull them off, which is dubious, because they simply lack the ability to do that kind of thing in secret. Okay, we have a lot of people in the room apparently have great faith in our government leaders to pull off these incredible operations. But one thing, again, I will concede something. If you are in Syria and someone says to you, hey, I think the government is conspiring to kill us, that's not a conspiracy theory. If there's a tank down the street firing shells at you, it's not a conspiracy theory that someone in Iran or North Korea or Syria, that the government is trying to kill you. And I make that very clear in my book. And that's because those are closed societies where the governments truly do control all the levers of power. There's no independent political system. There's no independent media. So if government elites want to conspire to murder thousands of their citizens, they can do that. That kind of thing is very difficult to do in Western open societies because we have an independent media, because we have an independent... When I give a speech, and I mention the media, I always get laugh lines from folks like that. They say, oh, the media independent, that's crazy. I wish the people who are laughing could be at the National Post offices or any media office of the last 10 years and see how many people who used to be on our payroll have become independent freelancers and answer to nobody. And those people truly are independent, and they're independent through nobody's will. It's not out of their own free will that they're independent. They've basically been fired. This is the state of the modern media. So the idea that I, as an editor, or that David Frum, or that anybody can control America's media or Canada's media, anybody who's been a practicing journalist knows that this isn't true. And in terms of 9/11, if 9/11 truly were an inside job, and I say this as a journalist, if 9/11 truly were an inside job, you would have 100,000 American journalists trying to win their Pulitzer Prize, finding the truth and publishing it. If Barack Obama truly was born in Kenya or Indonesia or wherever they're saying he was born now, again, same deal. You could get your prize by doing it. If 9/11 truly was an inside job, you'd get every single Democratic activist in Washington on the story because you'd be able to discredit the GOP for the next 50 years by pulling the story. So things function very differently in closed societies where large-scale government conspiracies are possible over the long term, and open societies where they're not. And I want to just give, before I finish, I want to give two examples plucked from the day's headlines. Does anyone in this room know who Lene Williams is? I know about Lene Williams because she was profiled on the Daily Beast. A 35-year-old woman, lives here in the Washington, D.C. area. In 2009, she worked for the CIA. They even sent her to Iraq. She went to spy camp. I'm sure she went to the museum. She learned the art of spycraft through the CIA. However, she had a falling out with the CIA back in 2009. They thought she was mentally unstable. She was at a hospital for a while. And as a result of that, she no longer works for the CIA. But she did something that you couldn't do 5 years or 10 years ago. She started tweeting about her experience. So if you look up Lene Williams on Twitter, you will find a Twitter stream from a woman tweeting secret stuff about the CIA. How is it possible in a society where some disgruntled former CIA employee is tweeting about the CIA for there to be any kind of centralized conspiracy about 9/11 or anything else that isn't instantly disclosed? In all of the millions of cables from WikiLeaks, was there one thing about any kind of 9/11 inside job? See, there you go. Okay, one more example. Because again, this world of conspiracies it's a very dark place, and we try and do a thought experiment. What would happen if someone went to a high-ranking government official or someone in the military and said, hey, let's stage a coup. Let's replace the current government with some kind of fascist corporate oligarchy. And I mention this because this is more or less the theme of a lot of the 9/11 conspiracy stuff you read. All right, well, here's someone else who tried it. And again, I know this because the book just came out. There's an author named Sally Denton. She just wrote a great book. It's called The Plots Against the President. And it's about all the fascistic intrigues against FDR back in 1933, 1934. And there's a fascinating story in there about a general named Smedley Butler. Now, Smedley Butler is not a household name now, but back in his day, the 30s, he was sort of the Colin Powell of his era. He was an extremely popular general. And one day, someone knocked on his door. The story is recounted in this book by Sally Denton. And it was your stereotypical emissaries from the military-industrial complex. And they had a big fat checkbook, they had Wall Street money, and they went to Smedley Butler and they said, you know what, this FDR thing isn't working out. And we're thinking of imposing a sort of fascistic dictatorship on the United States to rescue it from the Great Depression. Are you in? And as I was reading, I said, wow, this is right out of a 9/11 conspiracy theorist fantasy, except it took place in 1934 instead of 2001. And what do you think Smedley Butler did? Smedley Butler went to the media. He had a friend who worked for a Philadelphia newspaper. He said, hey, these creeps are trying to bribe me to create a coup. The story went out. It became the subject of congressional investigations. Everybody involved was disgraced. And that is how things work in an open society when people come to you and say, hey, let's stage a coup and create a fascistic government. And this was back in the age when fascism still had a good name. Mussolini back in 1934 was a figure of respect in the United States. Now fast forward to 9/11, fast forward to 2001, and imagine if you repeated that exercise 100 times, because that's what you need to do. If you want to blow up the World Trade Center, you can't do it with one guy. You need 100 Smedley Butlers. You go to 100 Smedley Butlers and say, hey, what do you say? We're going to create a fascistic corporate oligarchy in the United States, but first we have to blow up a few office buildings. Are you in? How many of those people do you think wouldn't run, who knows, FBI, CIA, the media, some guy like me? They'd run somewhere. Nowadays, they'd open a Twitter account. The idea that in an open society you can keep this kind of dark conspiracy under wraps is preposterous, which is one of the reasons that I'm so skeptical of conspiracy theorists. Now, the larger question is, why does this stuff matter? A lot of people who agree with me, even those people who agree with me, say, why'd you write a book about this stuff? You know, let these people have their fun. It's X-Files stuff. It's internet stuff. I don't think it's just internet stuff. I think a democracy becomes ungovernable if a substantial portion of the population lives in an alternative reality. And I'm not just talking about alternative opinions. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Everyone in this room has different opinions. But when you live in an alternative factual reality, a reality where Barack Obama was born in Kenya and is actually a Muslim seeking to impose Sharia on the United States, or the New World Order is secretly plotting to put us all in concentration camps, or 9/11 was an inside job. When you live in that kind of alternative reality, it's impossible to have any kind of democratic consensus because people can't even agree on basic facts. How are you supposed to have an argument about America's security needs with someone who believes that 9/11 was an inside job? How are you supposed to have an argument about Obamacare with someone who thinks that Obama's a secret agent from Iran? It becomes impossible. And so this isn't just about X-Files fantasies. This is about the political future of America and making sure that intelligent people can agree on certain basic facts about some of the most important events in American history. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you.
So Webster Tarpley is, I understand, going to speak with a video presentation. So that's going to mean that all of us have to, that's why we're not sitting on the stands, because you won't be able to see over our heads. I thank John for his remarks, and I'd like to now invite Mr. Tarpley to come up and present his version of reality.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I could be awarded the 5 minutes left over from the previous.
Same 20.
No conspiracy involved.
Oh, there is a conspiracy.
All right. So here's my answer to Jonathan Kay. Can't respond to everything, but we have to think back to the tremendous abuse of the 9/11 myth, as I would call it. You can remember when in the Bush White House, the answer to everything was 9/11. Why is there a deficit? 9/11. What about the environment? 9/11. Ari, answer was 9/11. Do you have a follow-up? The Giuliani for President campaign. Verb, noun, 9/11. And that was an attempt to take over the United States government. I think we have to be alert to the danger of neo-McCarthyite thinking, that is the demonization or the witch hunt for dissidents, which can, of course, under certain circumstances, take the extreme form of the Soviet method, which was to put dissidents in in wards for the mentally ill. The big question is, where is reality and whose mind is actually fleeing from reality, since this is posed? Now, the reality that I work on is, in particular right now, war avoidance. This was a demonstration 5 years ago. Some people here, I think, were part of it. We were at the White House. Beware another fake 9/11 designed to nuke Iran, because this is the reality of our times, and we've been through it enough so that it shouldn't surprise us. Now, I have some points of agreement with Mr. Kay. I have a low opinion of postmodernism, deconstructionism, Derrida. I actually discuss Derrida in my book. I discuss Derrida, Habermas, and Richard Rorty, the three main philosophical schools of the present age, and find them all wanting, although for different reasons. I would also share his diagnosis of Michael Ruppert without wanting to go into any details. I'm happy to leave David Icke among the lizards. I share his scorn for Rush Limbaugh, although I would point out that there is some evidence that William Buckley of the National Review was present at the creation for Limbaugh. My version of history is not that of Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn, because he hated civilization as such. Noam Chomsky, because he was the most implacable enemy of 9/11 truth. I also have a low opinion of Adbusters. This is the group that has sabotaged the Occupy movement from within and deprived it of a lot of its potential. Now, points of disagreement are, of course, numerous. The goal of history, or historiography, as I practice it, is not to find conspiracies at all costs. It is to tell what actually happened, whether there was a conspiracy or not. Anyone who says that there's nothing in the world but conspiracies, that everything's a conspiracy, that the world economic depression of our time is a conspiracy, and that's all, that's paranoia. I would agree. However, we have to look at objective reality. It is economic, military, and political. And within that reality, or on that bedrock of reality, conspiracies indeed may arise. If we think of the typology of tyranny, oligarchy, and the mob, ochlocracy, we can see that the tyrant, the Stalin or Hitler at the height of his power, doesn't need a conspiracy. He can do what he wants. He gives orders, things happen. The purely spontaneous mob is also not a conspiracy. It's sort of a free-for-all. But in that broad area in the middle, in an oligarchical situation, and that is the situation of the society that we live in, especially in the Anglo-American world, that's where conspiracies can flourish. Now, Mr. Kay's book has the disadvantage of being pre-Occupy. We now live in the post-Occupy world, and the notion of 1% oppressing the 99%, or as I would say, the oligarchy oppressing the people, is now, I think, a mainstream concept. And there's a real change in the spirit of the age. I would also note Machiavelli in his discourses. He says that the violent clash of the patricians and the plebs, made possible by the tribunes of the people, was a strength of the Roman Republic. That the clash of ideas is indeed the vigor of a democracy. And I would invite Mr. Kay to rethink his opposition to the scholarship for Joshua Blankney. If we can't have, if in our political situation, political system, we don't have a countervailing force that can say no to the hegemonic views, then maybe the academy can provide that. And I think that's what Blankney is trying to do. Now, my start with this goes back to 1978. I was invited by a former member of the Italian government, former and future, to write a book about the Moro assassination, who killed Moro, my finding, NATO intelligence, I think, borne out in the meantime. Mr. Kay also points out that I'm one of the few people who's still interested in the attempt to kill President Reagan. This is the headline from the Houston Post back in March, 31 years ago now. Reagan wounded. And this part, I'm afraid, Mr. Kay contrived to leave out. Bush's son was to dine tonight with shooting suspect's brother. Not George W. Bush, but Neil Bush, Silverado Neil Bush, was going to have dinner with Scott Hinckley, the elder brother of the would-be killer of the president. Bush's office confirmed this. Vice President confirms his son was to have hosted Hinckley's brother. And indeed, Neil Bush conceded they were going to meet. What does this mean? It's hard to tell, but that is certainly the appearance of a conflict of interest. When the, when the father is going to be president of the United States, how is it that in a government of laws, right, with all our journalist watchdogs on duty, this didn't become a huge scandal? Where's the grand jury? Where's the commission of inquiry? Now, Mr. Kay talks about conspiracy. I still find his notion of conspiracy elusive. He says the Tea Party is not a straightforward conspiracist movement, but it's mainstream because 71% of Republicans have a positive view of it. I think if you got 71% of Republicans, that's when you're really on dangerous ground. He also says the Hindu caste system is enforced by a real conspiracy of high caste elites. Oh my heavens. What will the Hindus say? Another problem with journalism is what we see here, right? The famous BBC ahead of the news, right? Not even abreast of the news, but ahead of the news. This is Building 7 over here. It's 9/11, of course. Here's Building 7. And she's telling you that this building, the 47-story Salomon Brothers building, has collapsed, but the poor lady doesn't see that that's the building there behind her. That is Building 7, and it hasn't collapsed. And she's gotten 23 minutes ahead of the news, if you can still see that. This is why people say that journalists are simply servants of those in power. Now, of course, the attack on conspiracy theories started very early. G.W. Bush went to the United Nations to say, we must never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Let's take a different view. In the history of conspiracy theory that Mr. Kay traces, he leaves out a couple of the most important episodes, the two American revolutions we've had, the American Revolution and the Civil War, which was a revolution on steroids. The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, distinguished 1967 book by Professor Bernard Bailyn of Harvard University. He won the Bancroft Prize in American history. He says that the unifying feature of the entire generation that waged the American Revolution was the notion of a British conspiracy to enslave the colonies. That is what they had in common. It started with Edmund Burke, of all people. George Washington, as you can see, talks about deliberation. Thomas Jefferson, maybe your cup of tea, not mine, but he talks about a plan of reducing us to slavery. You'll hear it in the Declaration of Independence. John Adams relied on to be quite outspoken. The conspiracy came in 1763 or 1764. It was secret, dark, and deep. It was a junto conspiracy, says John Adams. The Boston Committee of Correspondence thanks God for helping them to discover the plot. For them, obviously, God is a conspiracy theorist. The Declaration of Independence adumbrates, don't look now, a conspiracy theory. A long train of abuses he has, evinces a design to reduce the colonies to absolute despotism. And now my personal favorite, Abraham Lincoln, known in his time as Spotty Lincoln, because of the spot resolutions. The Polk regime said that the Mexicans had attacked the U.S. on U.S. territory. He repeatedly asked, where's the spot? Show me where. I want to know where. In other words, he refused to accept the official version of the conspiracy theory, which was being used for the main war of his time. You can see that book by Glenn Price, Lincoln as a conspiracy theorist. But it doesn't stop there. The most famous speech of American history in the 19th century is the House Divided speech. And he talks about Stephen Douglas, Franklin Pierce, Roger Taney, James Buchanan. They arrive at a construction site with pieces of wood that are machined to fit together and make an edifice. We cannot absolutely know, but we have to think that there has been pre-concert. It's impossible not to believe that they were together. So, there we have it. Abraham Lincoln, conspiracy theorist and paranoid, according to the modern view. And it doesn't stop there. The Republican Party in 1860 ran on a platform engineered by William Seward. It's called the Slave Power Conspiracy. The Republican Party built on a conspiracy theory. So ultimately, you can choose your faction. You can go with Burke, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Lincoln, and Seward, or with Durkheim. Durkheim, of course, is the source of the Hofstadter view, the notion of consensus, solidarity, anomie, normlessness, Pipes, Daniel Pipes, I guess, and the Bush, and so forth. I think for some of it, this is a rather easy choice. There's also the question of paranoia. Well, what's the comeback? It was not machined for tonight, but if you look at my book, 9/11 Synthetic, you'll see that I have a whole chapter, The 9/11 Myth as Collective Schizophrenia. So this was written probably 7 years ago. Schizophrenia, the inability to coordinate psychological functions, that is, to integrate the various parts of the mind, seems to me to be at work in the 9/11 story itself. I recommend Joseph Goebbels' False Consciousness, an essay on reification, where he discusses the police concept of history, that when evil is done, it's because of the evil intent of an individual perpetrator. And of course, Dr. Justin Frank's Bush on the Couch, which couches this in the terms of megalomania. Voltaire, coming at the beginning and end of Jonathan Kay's book, as a paragon of rationalism. It was Voltaire who said, "Montez, montez, il en restera toujours quelque chose." Keep lying, some of it will stick. This is not my brand of rationalism anyway. Now, my theory, which I have to thank Mr. Kay for putting in his book, the theory of state-sponsored false flag terrorism. We've got the world of the patsies, the world of the professionals, the technicians, and the moles. The patsies, these are the ones you see, the dupes, the useful idiots, fanatics, police agents, psychotics, double agents, provocateurs. In short, the Lee Harvey Oswalds. We've had a new one. Mohamed Merah in France last week is exposed as a patsy. He was a stringer for the DCRI, the FBI equivalent, or the DGSE, the CIA equivalent. But patsy he was. It's not shown that this character, Merah, was at all part of any shooting. There's no evidence really that he killed anybody, but now he's good and dead, so you won't have to worry about that. The moles. This is the important part. It is a private network loyal to Wall Street, which operates inside the US federal government, and the evidence for that, I think, is massive. The technicians are the people who can really carry out the deeds you see. They can make planes crash into buildings. They can kill a president in Dealey Plaza in Dallas and so forth. Don't forget the private military firms. It's likely that the command center has something to do with one of those, and I'm afraid without the brainwashed world of the controlled corporate media, this would not work. Government resources are accessed through drills. If you master this conceptual scheme, you're in a position to be your own pundit commentator. You can hope to have a Spanish reaction to the next false flag. Spanish because of the way in which the Spanish people rose up in 2004 when there were bombs in the subway and the reactionary Aznar tried to pull a coup. The Spanish people went into the streets and said, "No, we don't believe your story and we don't want you." Now, unlike most of the other 9/11 writers, I try to tell you what happened as to the extent I can. I'm not coming with unanswered questions. I'm coming with the diagnosis. 9/11 is a false flag war provocation by the intelligence agencies designed to unleash the war of civilizations. What is the war of civilizations? We've seen it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Libya, Somalia, Uganda, and I can't keep up because it has now proliferated so much. The concept, of course, comes from Samuel Huntington. And the basis of my analysis is 46 drills and exercises. 46. The 5th edition that came out for the anniversary last year is available in the back. 46 drills of 9/11. I'm going to show you pretty much what they are. It is, as far as I know, the greatest density of drills in US history. There's a buildup over almost 10 years with 23 drills that I've identified. On 9/11, we have 22 drills on the morning of 9/11. Extraordinary. The finding is that every meme of the myth was prepared and then executed via a drill. The use of the drill is to employ government resources surreptitiously in an atmosphere where Other people might interfere if they saw what you were doing. The basic concept is that the drill goes live. The drill is taken live or flipped live by members of this rogue network in the government. A Wall Street network. It's not a government network, but a Wall Street network. So here we go. Here's one of them, Amalgam Virgo 01. And again, the complete write-up is in here. Now, you have to bear with me. I have to excuse myself. The time is so short, I can't even enumerate them. I can't even read them off. I just have to show you the list. These, you can see drills in the 1990s, various kinds of preparation, flying planes into buildings. How could Condoleezza Rice say nobody ever thought planes would be flown into buildings? They've been drilling it for 10 years. Absolutely absurd. The drilling of the Afghan war. Unified Vision 01. That's the Afghan war. It was drilled in May. Red X in New York City. Planes crash into buildings and buildings collapse. Amalgam Virgo. This seems to be the object that hit the Pentagon. Not an airplane, but something else. We have various exercises to prepare the first responders. These we can debate. Vigilant Guardian. This is the hijack drill. And then we get to the drills on 9/11. The FBI anti-terror team is taken out of the picture. We could go on with this. I just have to show you the overall list. Here's a whole series of drills or actual military activities, a lot of these are real, to take as many planes as possible out of the Northeast United States. Some of them go to the four corners of the world. Some of them go to Nevada. The National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, this is in real time crashing planes into buildings.
Do you think you could name the guilty man in the next 2 minutes because we're coming up to 20 minutes?
Okay, let me just try to push through. There's even built in, suppose the Russians say, we don't want you in Afghanistan. They've thought about that too. They have somehow a strategic deterrent that extends into all of these other areas. Stratcom, there may be a plan for some kind of successor government. And then we have Amalgam Virgo, which is still on the drawing board. Take a look at my work. The Needs tapes. The confusion, here's an officer of the US Air Force. Somebody started the exercise early. The hijack's not supposed to be for another hour. Now, the Kane Hamilton, the two heads of the commission, as well as their top counsel, John Farmer, saw these tapes as proof that the US Air Force and NORAD had lied, had committed perjury to the commission. So if you believe in the Kane Hamilton report, the Kane and Hamilton themselves don't. The last one, I have two little video clips and then I'll quit. The Angel is next. This is, I think, the biggest single piece of political evidence in the entire thing. I don't think there's any other book that writes about it. This is the warning that came to Bush. Let me just see if I can.
The President is also gratified by the action.
This is the press briefing the next day.
The organization NATO, in which they invoked Article 5, saying that an attack on one NATO nation is an attack on all NATO nations. The President is also gratified by the United Nations Security Council resolution.
It comes in just a second.
Passed today condemning this attack and saying that it was a threat to international peace and security. Finally,
this is the point.
As the President said in his remarks this morning, freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know that we are facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. That's the President's words. In this case, we have specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were also intended targets of these attacks. As the President also said in his remarks, this battle will take time and resolve and make.
Okay. So the idea is that there's a threat to Air Force One. Now this one is even briefer.
Earlier today, White House officials expanded on the threat against Air Force One, saying that there was a telephone threat to the Secret Service, that Air Force One was on a target list. As the three successful attacks were all sneak attacks with no prior warning, why did you put credence in the telephone threat?
And again, you're getting into evaluations that involve the area of how the administration or
we don't need that part, but the idea here is simply threats were received by Air Force One that came in with code words, procedures, and knowledge of where Air Force One was actually located. And this indicates that a coup d'etat was indeed in progress, that the coup d'etat was the rogue network attempting to tell Bush what they wanted him to do, the point of this. I don't believe Bush knew anything about this in advance. I don't believe Cheney knew very much more, maybe a little more. But the basic idea is that this is an outside event by this rogue network designed to do what? Designed to push Bush into going on television saying bin Laden, bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, Afghanistan, Afghanistan, and we're sending the troops. So in other words, start the war of civilizations. And I guess that's, I guess with Zbigniew Brzezinski, we'll have to wait for another time. So.
Well, I think we're out of time. Sorry.
Just reach over and get that.
This conspiracy is obviously too immense to fit into 20 minutes. So we'll take some questions. I think you can, both Webster and John can now, with the screen up, retreating into its fortress of solitude with its secrets. There's now room for the two panelists on the stage. So I'll take your questions. Please keep them brief. I know it's difficult to frame all of the unexplained facts into a question of a sentence or two, but if you would make the effort, I'm sure the panelists would appreciate it. Let me start at the back and work forward, because people at the back do tend to get overlooked. So in the very back corner there.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley? I'm assuming by War of Civilizations you meant the sort of war between two camps of, Middle East versus Western ideals. Wouldn't you say that this sort of had already begun with the U.S.'s initial involvement with Afghanistan during the Cold War? How would this be a motive for the United States government to conspire to attack the World Trade Center?
Well, the Afghan events, of course, of the 1979 up until, the end of the 80s, were the matter of mobilizing Al-Qaeda, what I would call the CIA's Arab Legion. This was something developed under the general aegis of Zbigniew Brzezinski that I was just about to get to, with the help of people like former Secretary of Defense Gates, who was Zbigniew Brzezinski's deputy, and that was used against the Soviets. And I think that, first of all, that teaches us something, that the faction, which is also now the faction more or less that is now in power with the Obama administration, their typical modus operandi is to use these Arab auxiliaries or Muslim auxiliaries as mercenaries, as patsies, as pawns on the field. The problem that they had towards 2000, 2001 was that some very, very aggressive people had been waiting during the time of Clinton, and they found that they couldn't get Clinton to do very much in the way of foreign aggression, except when he had been so weakened by the impeachment that they were able to start the bombing of Serbia, which was, of course, a great watershed in 1999. If you go and look at the behavior of George Bush the Younger during the time that the Chinese were holding this American spy plane, which had gone down on the coast of China. And you'll see, you look at the National Review and the Weekly Standard and other, what can we say, organs of aggressive foreign policy thought, and you'll see that they're very unhappy with Bush because he didn't do anything. He didn't use this incident with China to get something going. In other words, it's a group of people who believe very profoundly that war is the answer, that war is most conducive to the maintenance of U.S. and British world domination or world influence. And they weren't getting that from Bush. So it would seem to indicate then some much bigger shock was needed to shock not just the presidency, but the Congress and the media and public opinion and a whole series of other institutions had to be shocked into this titanic adventure of the global war on terror. And I think that's clearly what 9/11 did.
Because, as is often said, who controls Afghanistan controls Tajikistan. Yes, sir.
Well,
third row from the back.
Here.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. This is such a broad topic. It's 2 hours or 3 hours isn't enough. And I just want to preface my comment by saying that the three biggest terrorist organizations in the world are the CIA, Mossad, and British MI6. There are two important facts. By calling us conspiracy theorists, it's a way to denigrate what we talk about. That's why I deal in facts. Fact number one, Osama bin Laden met with the CIA station chief in Dubai in July 2001. That was documented by the Figaro newspaper. Anwar al-Awlaki met with Pentagon generals and bigwigs at a big dinner, and this was reported by Fox News. So how could a terrorist, why is he meeting in secret with high-ranking generals at a big dinner at the Pentagon? This proves he was a patsy handler, and Osama bin Laden was a CIA asset. And I want to reiterate, the true axis of evil is Washington, D.C., Tel Aviv, and London. Thank you.
All right. The ground rule here has to be questions and compression. Yes, sir. There in the mid row.
Hi, my question is for Mr. Tarpley. Given the idea that a theory is useful only insofar as it's falsifiable, I'm wondering what threshold of evidence would you accept to actually accept that 9/11 was not an inside job?
I don't think this question is very meaningful. I think it's in the area of a formalism that I don't think belongs to this kind of analysis. I've only portrayed a little bit of the analysis that I would give. Right, the book has the rest of it. Take a look at it and evaluate it. But I would like to go back to Tajikistan. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who counts as the mainstream, I guess at least for some people, has a whole book called The Grand Chessboard, which is devoted to nothing but the overwhelming importance of this part of the world. And if you look at Afghanistan, it is a key to Pakistan, right? At that time, the only Muslim country with nuclear weapons. And it's also somehow the hub of Eurasian, some kind of Eurasian future infrastructure. If you want to build an Indo-European rail line, for example, if you want to build a rail line from New Delhi to Paris and Berlin, that's going to have to go through that Khyber Pass. That's going to have to go through Afghanistan. And so similarly for various kinds of pipelines. So I don't think that's trivial. But the main thing, of course, is the notion of the shock, the mobilization of public opinion, the creation of an atmosphere of crisis and hysteria, which obviously succeeded very well. We're still groaning under the impact of it. The Afghan war grinds on and on. It has become institutionalized as a result of those events.
So, as anyone who's ever played Risk knows, Afghanistan is the key to everything. Just as everybody who is familiar with the Bush family knows that if you're launching a conspiracy, Neil Bush is the Bush you'd want to put in charge of it. John.
Sorry, if I could just maybe respond to the last question. The question of what evidence a conspiracy theorist will accept to falsify their theory is an interesting one, and it's actually at the center of my book because it helps define what a conspiracy theory is. The reason you can never win an argument with a conspiracy theorist is they will simply expand the conspiracy theory to swallow up the new evidence you have. So if I'm having a debate with a 9/11 truther and I say, well, you know, the 9/11 Commission report clearly supports my position. I say, oh, the 9/11 Commission report, it's written by a bunch of Bush lackeys. I can't believe you even waste my time by mentioning it. I'll say, okay, forget the 9/11 Commission report. Let's talk about the National Institute of Standards and Technology report on how the World Trade Center. Oh my God, how could you even mention that? Those guys are all losers and they're all lackeys. You could actually, and there's, okay, well, how about the media? Don't get me started on the media. So the conspiracy keeps growing and growing and growing to encompass every authority you cite. And so after an hour of this, you say, well, you know what? You've pretty much swallowed all of the world's journalists and judiciaries and legislatures and independent researchers into this grand conspiracy. So who's left outside the conspiracy except me and you? And that goes to answer your question that there is no evidence that a true conspiracy theorist will accept to falsify their theory because the trick of the ever-expanding conspiracy swallows all evidence, and that is the definition of a conspiracy theory.
Would you not like to take another question? I mean, you can take a minute. Yeah, take a minute.
Could I please just... my answer to that would be that the Who is the conspiracy? 19 mentally deficient characters, right? That's a different conspiracy. I just tried to point out that in the wake of the Kane-Hamilton Commission, Kane and Hamilton wrote a book called Without Precedent. And in that book, they say, we were lied to. There was systematic perjury by NORAD, by U.S. Air Force officers.
Yes, and actually, if I could address that, they've said that clearly, and they referred that portion of the testimony to the Inspector General of NORAD, who followed it up. It was clearly specified in the report. It was not hushed up, and that particular piece of perjured evidence was introduced to make NORAD seem more competent than they actually were. In fact, their response was less knowing, less competent than they presented it as, which actually goes against the grain of everything you've been arguing.
But I just out of curiosity, I would like to call for a show of hands from the audience, just so we get to know what we're dealing with here. How many people in this audience are broadly sympathetic with, whatever, quibbles you may have to Mr. Tarpley's theory of what happened on 9/11? So it looks like 2/3, 3/4. How many of the people in this room don't believe that President Obama was born in the United States? I'm curious whether these things are overlap or whether these are like the MSNBC and Fox of the. I'm curious. So there were some hands. Just till we know, people who doubt that President Obama was born in the United States. So we got okay. So this is a 9/11 truther crowd, not a Barack Obama is a Kenyan socialist crowd. Well, you're pretty ridiculous. All right, more questions. Yes, sir.
You wanted
sorry, the man in the yellow tie.
Well, I got the microphone now, so I'll
sir,
you wanted
if you're going to do this,
I would like the gentleman to explain why the 23-minute gap in Building 7.
If we're going to have a discussion, you must
obey the rules. Sir, you're buying that yellow tie. Is that your plan?
Yes.
Okay.
I got the orders directly from Bilderberg. They want him.
Okay. I'm a little bit surprised because I see that we are 2 against 1 there, and you are supposed to be the moderator, and that is a neutral position.
He gave you the microphone. You should be saying thank you.
Why should I say thank you?
So give the microphone back if you don't want the microphone. He intervened to give you the mic, and you berate him? That makes no sense.
Don't get the nerve. Let me ask my question. You talked 15 minutes, you had 20 minutes.
Ask the question, sir.
Couldn't even finish. As I restate, I am a little bit surprised at 2 against 1 when you should be.
Do you have a question?
First point. Second point, on Mr. K, I don't know if there is here some judge that decide who are the conspiracy theorists, who are the normal people. I was surprised by the banality of your presentation, and I thought you gave a lot of room to Webster Tarpley, who show an amount of knowledge, an amount of methodology, also philosophically, that there's no comparison with what you said. If I ask you, when the Bundestag was burned at the beginning of the Hitler and the Nazi movement in Germany, if someone in Germany had said this was a conspiracy, he would end up in jail and killed. According to you, to your Hegelian standpoint, if someone has power, or is a government, or has some form of official power, is right, and cannot be doubted.
Okay, let me answer
that.
I'm happy to answer. Okay, I'm happy to answer that question.
It's totally false.
Yeah. Okay, may I address that? Well, we're in agreement. I agree with you about the Reichstag fire. As I quite clearly stated in my banal presentation, if you live in a closed society, the example I gave was...
What is a closed society?
The example I gave was Syria, but clearly... excuse me, can I
we have to let the people who are here to answer. You've got a question? I assume you want an answer.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
The example I gave was Syria, which, of course, is a closed society. It's not a free society. And I said quite clearly amongst the banalities, which maybe caused you to nod off, that in a society such as that, if someone says the government is trying to kill you, and if someone says the government has entered into a murderous conspiracy against citizens, that is probably true, because that happens in closed societies, such as, for instance, Bashar Assad's Syria, or, to raise your example, which I agree with, Nazi Germany. By the way, when I was covering the Republican election campaign in New Hampshire, I noticed that at all the town hall meetings, when the woman or the man with the microphone was giving it to someone in the crowd, they always kept their hand on the mic, and I think we found out why.
Okay.
This side of the... Yeah, go ahead. I would just say, in terms of open society, closed society, right? We now have the Obama administration. The Obama administration claims the right to kill any American citizen anywhere in the world with no due process based on a purely administrative decision by bureaucrats. The Obama administration claims the right to send any of us to Guantanamo Bay in perpetuity to be tortured basically until the end of time. Now, it could be objected that these powers, as far as we know, are not widely exercised yet, but this complacent view that we're an open society and that we're immune from all of those evil abuses, I think is a dangerous kind of complacency. And I would warn against the slippery slope in these measures, especially if popular vigilance is not lively and awake. These liberties can go a glimmering.
I agree with that.
I agree. Sir, in the front row here.
I wanted to comment on something that Mr. Kay, you had said. You had said that, I think in the very beginning, you had said that conspiracy theory was an attempt to name the demon, to put a face to whatever the evil was. My only question regarding that would be, isn't that also the attempt of the official version of 9/11 to put a face to what was being perpetrated? So when somebody like Dr. Tarpley or anybody else says that that conspiracy theory is really conspiracy fact, aren't they both sides of a conspiracy, that Bin Laden was involved in the conspiracy? And then, if I could just one quick follow-up in relation to what Mr. Frum, you had said about conspiracy theories being strained, the truth being strained through time. I recently had read that in 1969, 85% of people doubted any conspiracy theory regarding JFK. Today, 85% believe in some kind of a conspiracy related to JFK. So wouldn't it be fair to say then that history has shown quite the opposite, that instead of conspiracy theories falling away, in fact, they become more and more validated?
Sure. Your first question, I think, is a good one. When you say, well, the first question was, is it not the case that the official version of events is in some way related to a conspiracy theory, and that you're saying that 19 Arabs got on planes and under orders from Osama bin Laden attacked the United States? Look, there is the crime of conspiracy in U.S. criminal law for a reason, is that sometimes people do enter into very real conspiracies. What real-life conspiracies tend to be limited criminal enterprises, and they tend to be hatched by locals. Osama bin Laden was essentially a local actor using using modern technology to impose death thousands of miles away. What conspiracy theories do, the kind that I write about in my book, is they tend to take people like Osama bin Laden and 100 people like him and put him in a sort of flowchart and show that they're all controlled by the same, oligarchy is the term that Webster Tarpley uses in his book. So he said, you would have Bush and the CIA and Osama bin Laden and all these disconnected actors seemingly acting in concert. That is what a conspiracy theory is, when you take all these elements together. I'm not disputing the fact that evil things happen, and often they happen as the result of what we would call, in a technical criminal sense, conspiracy. It happens, but it tends to be a lot more limited than the kind of overarching conspiracy theories that you see written about in 9/11 Truth Movement, for instance.
Okay. Sir, on this side, and then you were one of the first hands up.
Yeah, I got a question for Mr. Kay. It seems that the mainline motivation for September 11th is Islamic Jihad, and the alternatives, conspiracy theories, are U.S.-based inside jobs. But I'm wondering about major communist countries, whether or not it could be a conspiracy initiating there, because they provide weapons for these jihadist groups, and also there have been mysterious explosions around 1999 to 2000 in major communist countries. And they also, I think, have better abilities to penetrate airspace. Do you think that after the so-called end of the Cold War, that the spies just disappeared, or do you think they could have done something like September 11th?
One thing that America got pretty good at during the Cold War was determining when there was Russian infiltration in a particular area. And one thing about the Russians is when they take someone's side, they tend to be rather obvious about it. If you look at the current Russian support of the Assad regime in Syria, there's no subtlety to it. They're taking Assad's side in a very clear way. So I don't think that would be their modus operandi. And also, just going back to what David Frum was saying about Afghanistan being the key to Tajikistan. If there was one area of the world where the United States wasn't interested in building a trans-Eurasian railway or whatever the dream of this was, that would be it. And the reason I say that is because the United States had an amazing opportunity to control Afghanistan if it wanted. After 1989, the United States had Afghanistan all to itself. It had this huge network of mujahideen. The Soviets were gone. If they wanted to stick around, it was theirs for the taking. If you believe the 9/11 Commission report isn't neocon propaganda, and you read it, you'll see that one of the big criticisms of the U.S. government was that they completely neglected Afghanistan in the 1990s. And they did this during the Clinton era. They did this during Republican and Democratic institutions. And if they really wanted to build this railway, they wanted to build this pipeline, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to do.
Let me take the man. I know Mr. Tarpley has something to say, but let me take the man in blue, and you can build your answer onto, because he's been very patient.
Sure.
Hi, questions for Mr. Kay. How do you explain Operation Northwoods, which wasn't declassified until spring 2001 by James Bamford?
Yeah.
That's the first question. Second question, how do you explain Alex Jones in July 2001 launching Operation Expose Government Terror and predicting that that the government was going to stage attacks in New York City and Washington and blame it on Osama bin Laden? And third question also. I got one more question. How many articles have you done about the Bilderberg Group and its agenda? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I've been deficient in my coverage of the Bilderberg Group's evil agenda, but I do talk about it in the book. I also in terms of Alex Jones, it's actually quite true, and I mentioned this in my book. It's quite true that on Alex Jones's syndicated radio show before the 9/11 attacks, who I interviewed for my book, Alex Jones did tell people that there was going to be an attack on the United States. I think he might have mentioned New York, didn't mention the World Trade Center, and that it was going to be used as a pretext to launch wars of conquest abroad. The problem with that is that Alex Jones does that about 17 times every day. Alex Jones runs a completely paranoid radio show, and I think, I don't know if Mr. Tarpley would agree with me,
I'm
but
a frequent guest, and I have to stick up for Alex Jones. I don't think this is fair.
Now, in terms of Northwoods, in terms of Operation Northwoods, just so everybody in the room knows, Northwoods is a completely real historical phenomenon. It was basically the Joint Chiefs of Staff came to JFK and they said, hey, we've got this great operation we've designed. It's a pretext to attack Castro. What we're going to do is, well, there are a few variations, but basically they were going to shoot down a plane near Cuban airspace, blame it on the Cubans, and then invade Cuba. It's your classic false flag operation. Classic false flag operation, and JFK basically said to them, are you guys nuts? This is stupid, and it'll be disclosed immediately. It's the dumbest thing in the world, and he sent them packing, which is exactly what any president would do when presented with that kind of operation. In an open society where the president realizes that these things are disclosed. It wouldn't happen in Nazi Germany, it wouldn't happen in Syria, because their leaders have a monopoly on information flow. United States.
Could I?
All right, Mr. Tarpley has
just on Northwoods, a couple of things on Northwoods. The Bush-Blair conversation of January 2003, where Bush says, we should paint an airplane with United Nations colors, send it over Iraq, Saddam will shoot it down, and there we have our casus belli. That's number one. The second one with Northwoods is the guy who signed it, General Lyman Lemnitzer, went on to Europe and, as far as I can see, founded Gladio, the stay-behind operation from which so many terrorist groups have then spawned. And the other thing, of course, is that Northwoods really was carried out. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is a variation on the theme of Northwoods, so I wouldn't be too complacent about that. Bush, of course, supported the Taliban. He gave a payment of $65 million to the Taliban to pay their entire payroll for the first half of 2001. Taliban were ideal because they kept everybody out. They hated the Iranians, hated the Russians, hated the Chinese. They hated everybody. It was perfect. But could I propose to maybe change gears? I fear we're not doing justice to the other side of Mr. Kay's argument, which is his concern is, why do people not believe in institutions, right? Why is it that the official doctrine of so many institutions is falling flat? Why are all these institutions discredited, for want of a better word? Why are hegemonic institutions no longer hegemonic? In a democracy, we deal in something called eudaimonic legitimation, right? If for a democratic government like ours, should be, you've got to deliver the goods. It means economic progress. You've got to deliver jobs. You've got to deliver rising standards of living, full employment. The record that we have over 40 years is a decline of 2/3 in the standard of living. The other thing we've got are these endless wars, meaningless wars that don't enjoy popular support. They're predicated on political assassinations with Kennedy and or false flag events. And I would suggest that we ought to look at the broader reality around just this narrow conspiracy yes or no theme. Look at the discrediting of the institutions by their own behavior and what might be the remedy. And I have to tell you, my political agitation goes in the direction of the New Deal, of the policies of Franklin D. Roosevelt, of a return to policies that have served us well in the past, turning away from the extreme Austrian libertarian views of a Ron Paul, turning away from the Keynesian methods that have failed us, turning away from the Malthusian methods of the radical ecologists who dominate so much of the Democratic Party. In other words, the reason people don't believe government, they don't believe medicine, the academy, all of these institutions are failing. They don't deliver the goods. They're lacking in legitimation because they don't deliver what people expect. And I would suggest that rather than trying to repress opinion, right, with curriculum reforms or other things, let's look at the broader picture in society and what can actually be done there, because it seems to me that's where progress could be made.
You know, can I ask, that's a very interesting point, and I wonder if I could ask for another show of hands. How many people... No. I'm curious. No, I'm sorry. Let's push back the frontiers of human ignorance here. There's something I'd like to know. How many people are there here in this room? Don't answer it. You don't have to answer. It's not compulsory. But I'm just curious. How many people are there in this room who, in some way or another, doubt official modern medicine and use alternative methods of? No, sorry, Dr. Taprley just raised that question himself. How many people, for example, use herbal methods or other kinds of informal treating? So, about half. About half. That's interesting. That's interesting. All right. Yes, in the mid row, the lady.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm sure in your research for your book, you did a thorough analysis of all of the evidence proving that 9/11 is an inside job and found it wanting. I'm curious if you were put in a position to have to argue for that side, what do you consider to be the most compelling evidence that 9/11 was an inside job, and why do you find it wanting?
That's a good question. I actually became quite fascinated with the technical side of the accusations about 9/11 being an inside job. In a former life, I was a metallurgical engineer. I have a master's degree in metallurgical engineering, specializing in thermodynamics. As a result, I became extremely intrigued by the technical aspects of the arguments about how the columns and the girders fell in WTC 1 and 2 and 7. I read the NIST reports with interest. And that side of the debate actually was quite fascinating. Even before I became interested in conspiracy theories, my background in metallurgical engineering gave me a pronounced interest in that. In terms of the actual evidence that 9/11 was an inside job, because I ascribe, I believe in the conventional account of 9/11, that it was the work of Al-Qaeda, I don't see any of it as particularly compelling. The one piece of evidence that I've always seen as useful from a propaganda point of view for 9/11 conspiracy theorists is the video of WTC 7 falling at 5:20 p.m. on 9/11. And that is because the video clip they show always is very carefully selected to show the undamaged side of the building, so that people seeing it will think that, oh, that resembles controlled demolition. When you see the other side of the building, you see the uncontrolled fires that were raging for 8 hours, you become much more skeptical. So from a propaganda point of view, I think that the carefully selected footage of WTC-7's collapse is useful to the conspiracy theorists, but is in no way convincing to anybody who actually delves into it.
What about passports? Yeah, the magic.
No. Let me take, just in front of the pillar there, there's a man in a jacket. Yeah, sir.
My question's for Jonathan Kay, and it may or may not be a yes or no question, so no pressure. But after watching your presentation, I can see that you're someone who's at least open to the potential of their true conspiracies is an actual phenomenon. Facts are facts, black is black, white is white. The iPhone in front of my face is an iPhone. I was just wondering if you were all aware, and again, yes or no, no pressure, of the true conspiracy of the forged papal prayer in the January 1965 issue of Commentary magazine. And if you don't, I understand, it might be before your time.
No idea.
Thanks.
I thought you were going to ask me about JFK, because I think the mob did it. I know nothing about Commentary magazine in that context.
The man with the camera here. The man who's been filming us with the camera. I hope you have a signed permission slip from the two participants.
Well, I'm a philosopher by trade, and you stated, Mr. Kay, that the meaning is imposed upon reality by humans. You then went on to say that conspiracy theorists believe in alternative factual reality. You then went on to say that we have to have this dialogue in some sense to agree on basic facts. A debate presupposes logic, as I'm sure you know, but those two claims can't coexist. You can't have meaning created by humans and then turn around and say that we have to agree on basic facts. That's a basic contradiction in claims. And so I think the direction that Dr. Tarpley was going was a little bit more in the direction that we need to go, in the direction of maybe the problem here is that we're not actually looking at objective reality, at facts. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, let me answer the question, if I may, in a slightly broader way, I'll answer by saying that the process of writing the book I did made me much more skeptical than I once was that rational debate, at least in the current internet-mediated era, can really bring minds together. And the reason for that is that most of the people I interviewed for my book were very, very intelligent people. People like Mr. Tarpley, who's Princeton educated, and I met a lot of people who I would call conspiracy theorists, who are very smart people. It's not intelligence that's lacking. What is happening is that I think most people, including myself, our ideological commitments often are emotional. And then we look for facts to back up those ideological commitments. And it doesn't matter what your ideological commitments are. It could be, Zionism, anti-Zionism, laissez-faire capitalism. I know people who are obsessed with global warming on one side or the other. The internet has enabled people to find factoids that support every conceivable position and then draw rational lines between them. Webster Tarpley is very similar in some respects to Alex Jones. You talk to Alex Jones, I mean, the guy has like an encyclopedic brain. And any conspiracy theory in the world, he will have 20 little factoids drawn from the internet at his disposal, and he'll draw them together in sinister ways to show that this conspiracy did or didn't happen. And especially with web video propaganda, and video being the most efficient means of propagandizing, and now that's available to everybody. So you could string a dozen factoids together, put a video together like Loose Change, and you can make it very compelling. As you know, I'm highly skeptical of 9/11 conspiracy theories. If I dim the lights and I watch Loose Change with that spooky soundtrack, you see WTC-7 fall, it's spooky. It's a very effective piece of propaganda. And in the internet age, because of all that stuff, because of how easy it is, no matter how smart you are, to be convinced of that sort of thing, it's very, very, very difficult for the sort of rational discourse that you're presuming in your question to take place.
Mr. Tarpley?
I'm laboring under the disadvantage that nobody wants to ask me any questions here. Nobody cares what I think about anything. Mr. K is so popular. Let me just say, hang on. That was a rhetorical device. Captatio benevolentiae. The first thing I would point to is a broader issue, right? Mr. K pointed out the book by Sally Denton. I'm going to be very interested in this book. This is the subject of my current research. The idea, however, is that we don't really get to be comforted that there was no coup against Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1934. Remember, this was not just anybody's coup. The internal features of it point to the banking house of J.P. Morgan at the time. It was known to contemporaries as the Morgan coup. The attempt to bring it out, the Dick Stein Committee in Congress was pretty much suppressed. That was 1934. If you look in the literature, you can find indications of another coup against Roosevelt in 1937 using anti-communist Russian emigres with a general by the name of Van Horn Mosley, I think. 1941, Pearl Harbor. And my current research is precisely on this issue of Pearl Harbor, that Roosevelt had been forced to get people like Stimson, McCloy, Lovett, Bundy into the Pentagon and the War Department, the Navy Department. And then ultimately the defeat of the United States at Pearl Harbor is an episode of Wall Street's war against Franklin D. Roosevelt, which did not end then, but then went on in 1945 to what many contemporaries thought was the assassination of Franklin D. Roosevelt in April 1945, that he had been poisoned by a network, including a Russian painter who was with him on the last day. So I think if you just look at the 1934 case and say, oh, the system worked, Smedley Butler went to the press, notice that nothing happened to any of those plotters. None of them were indicted. Nothing at all happened. And you've also got to remember that in some other countries, right, in Spain with the Spanish Civil War, in France with Marshal Pétain, people were not so lucky. And that there was, it seems to me that there was a real danger in the 1930s of fascist or Nazi world domination precisely because the upper crust of society in so many countries had a profound ideological sympathy for fascism, its labor policies, and the geopolitical use of fascism against the Soviets.
I'd like to go back to the back of the room and work forward again. As I say, it's always the back of the room does tend to get overlooked, so I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Yes, you're thinking the second row from the back, and there's a lady with glasses.
I just want to thank the Spy Museum for doing this. It's wonderful, and I almost feel apologetic that you are the presenter. I'm in between. I'm searching for knowledge, Webster Tarpley and yourself, and I'm getting information, and my question is, how do you expect us to even want to read your book when you're being contemptuous and you're berating another author about his information? You explicitly, I really don't want to hear from anymore. I really think Mr. K is a good book, which is something that I think everybody needs to read, both sides of the story, which I am trying to search. But with this, what I'm getting from, I don't feel like you're giving any information or facts like Mr. Tarpley is, except berating him and trying to belittle the people that have come here to listen to both sides of the story.
I don't think I belittle. First of all, I was the one who suggested David Frum as the moderator, and I'm very appreciative that he took the time to do it, and I think I'd like to express that appreciation. I think he's been doing his best to try and make the best of a rough room. In terms of your question, though, I actually think that's a good question, and it's the problem I had when I wrote the book, because when I surveyed the landscape, there were lots of books by conspiracy theorists, and there were some books that were written making fun of conspiracy theorists. And I didn't want to write a book like that. I wanted to write a book from a perspective of someone who doesn't believe what I call conspiracy theories, but wanted to take them seriously as a political and social phenomenon. And I had to walk a fine line in the book because I didn't write a book of mockery. And I was very pleased. The Wall Street Journal in its review, I was very proud that it said, John K. does not mock these people. And I was very proud of that. And I don't think it's accurate to say that I've been berating people tonight. It's not something I would do, and it's not something I think you should accuse me of. Okay. However, but you do make a good point that the way I've written the book and the way I talk about conspiracy theorists is to a certain extent like I'm analyzing them like a bug under a glass. And I struggled with this because I realized that it's ideologically patronizing, but I knew of no other way to write the book to take seriously the phenomenon socially and politically, while at the same time being realistic about the fact that I find many of these views preposterous for reasons that I explain in my speech. So I hope that's a good explanation for you.
In the man in the blue T-shirt here, and just on the aisle. Sorry, the one. Yes, you sir. Sorry, it's hard. The lights are bright. I don't always see it.
My question is for Webster Tarpley.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jonathan Kay's premise seemed to be that there's no real way to, in a coup attempt, say in his Smedley Butler example, to suppress or intimidate all dissenters. So I wonder if you could go into some mechanics in how this rogue network could have suppressed and intimidated all potential leakers or dissenters in all the institutions that would have been involved and touched by this conspiracy.
For 9/11, you mean?
For 9/11, yeah.
Well, I think that ought to be fairly obvious. They do it by terror. In other words, their own terror. The threat that if you divulge any of this stuff, that your own personal existence, your family, your livelihood, your job, will all be taken away. It doesn't have to be the actual exercise of that, but I think the threat is certainly there. Well, I think that's a bit more complicated, to tell you the truth. But I don't really see this as a problem. The rogue network, again, is this network of people loyal to Wall Street, and we must never forget this. I was going to show, if I had more time, I would have shown you a picture of Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles embodies the address of this phenomenon that I'm talking about. It's unfortunate we don't know who the Allen Dulles of today is, but certainly in the 1950s into the 1960s, Allen Dulles, the dominant figure of the modern CIA, OSS veteran, bringing with him a whole series of people from the OSS, the dominant figure on the Kennedy cover-up commission, the Warren Commission, embodying this point where the intelligence community meets Wall Street, and of course he had been a Wall Street bond lawyer, and then his brother John Foster Dulles bringing in the State Department. I would posit that where the CIA, the State Department, and Wall Street meet, this is the locus of actual power. It is above and behind the White House. It is superior in its long-term capabilities, especially in the area of foreign policy and security and military political affairs of this type. And domestic issues, economics and things like this, it is less dominant and above all less secretive. But I think it's there. In other words, people have talked about the invisible government, the parallel government, the secret government, the rogue network, the deep state. And some of these are quite, people like Senator Inouye or other people. I think Theodore Roosevelt even had something to say about this at some point. This is the phenomenon that you're dealing with. Michael Rupert and others said, oh, it's so radical, we're going to blame it all on Cheney. Well, of course, Cheney is now an invalid, but the events still go on. The danger of the war with Iran is with us. The false flag terror events, Mohammed Merah and others, these go on and on. So the radical sounding thesis that Bush and Cheney could be blamed for all of this is now in retrospect revealed as absurd. And one of the things it shows is that as time passes, the secrets cannot be kept. People who might have doubted the ability to control planes by remote control, now you're confronted with Predator drones, Reaper drones, flying all over the world, big world issue. They're run by Global Hawk technology and similar things like this.
We actually have one way in the back.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this is kind of for both of you, but this idea that Webster Tarpley talks about with able danger, doesn't the fact that in Libya you have these sort of rebels with al-Qaeda ties gaining power, and now through like the Friends of Syria, you have like a Hillary Clinton prepared to give like massive untold millions to similar groups. We don't know they're Al-Qaeda, but Al-Qaeda is definitely working for us. So how far-fetched is his idea of Al-Qaeda as some kind of Arab legion?
Having visited Libya in June and July under the NATO bombing, I think it's quite obvious that Al-Qaeda is what I've always said it was. It is the CIA Arab Legion. It is a paramilitary branch of the U.S. intelligence community. That's what it was in Afghanistan against the Soviets. It has never ceased to be this. And we have these, extremely high-profile cases. The infamous Belhaj, a.k.a. Hassadi, who started off as the emir of the Islamic Emirate of Derna, between Tobruk and Benghazi, then became the military governor of Tripoli, of the capital of the country, was then sent on by NATO with an airlift to Iskenderun, Turkey, where he directed and has directed jihadis going across, Libyan veterans being sent across the border into Syria. Right? Anybody who had any confusion about what Al-Qaeda actually represents, well, look at it. And Mrs. Clinton comes out and says, we know that Al-Qaeda is among the people rebelling in Syria, but we're going to arm them and we're going to pay them anyway. I wonder if she's not running afoul of some laws with that stuff.
Yes, sir. Just to the right of the aisle in the middle row at the back there.
Hi, Mr. K. I really commend your patience as you wrote your book. I just had a question. As you're doing your interviews, did you ever met someone who relented from his thoughts on the 9/11 conspiracy theory? And then what was some of the things that sort of reeled him back into reality? Like, what were some of the steps that he took?
No, it never happened. And the reason for that is I explained a little bit in the speech is that when people develop an all-encompassing theory of evil, which is what very aggressive conspiracy theories are, the idea that there's some oligarchy controlling the world and making all sorts of evil things happen, people tend to grasp it with the same fervor that they grasp a religion. And just as, if you and I had a conversation and I tried to convince you to switch religions, I'd probably be unsuccessful. And in the same way that when I interviewed conspiracy theorists, and the few times that I actually tried to engage them in any kind of debate, it was always unsuccessful. Because their ideological commitment to it was so strong. The only exception to that was after Barack Obama released his long-form birth certificate, I did encounter some birthers who said, you know what, I guess he really is an American citizen. And I think the reason for that is it became tied into mainstream Republican politics to a certain extent, and there were some people who weren't really hardcore conspiracy theorists. They were just kind of hangers-on because, I don't know, they saw it on some Usenet group or something like that, and they became very casual about it. So in that case, it happened. If you're interested in the phenomenon, by the way, there's this guy. If you Google confessions of an ex-9/11 truther, there's this really interesting guy. He went to college in New York, and he wrote this whole narrative about how his name was Mark Milkey or something like that. But you'll find it if you Google it. And he has this whole narrative about how when he started off in college, he was this 9/11 truther because he watched Loose Change with his friends. And then, well, around this, I'm not saying it's causative, around the same time he stopped smoking marijuana, about two weeks later, he said, well, wait a sec, this is BS. And what's really interesting, though, is if you look at the comment section of his website, it's basically all these people accusing him of being Judas and betraying, the loyalty of the group. But he's one of the few people I know who actually, just climb back out of the rabbit hole. And you can find his website. It's still on Google.
Could I just, on the religious issue, I have to say, I think sometimes the shoe is definitely on the other foot. 9/11, after all, the belief in 9/11 has now become, to some degree, the compulsory doctrine of the state, about as much as it can be under conditions where we still have the First Amendment, which I hope we keep. I can remember in October 2001, I made my first speech against the 9/11 official story, such as it was then. It was the Indiana Consortium for International Programs in a state park on the Wabash. And at that point, the question was, what is the official version? It was the Spanish Inquisition would show you a Bible and say, believe in this or be burned. And for the first 2 years, 2001, 2002, 3, into 2004, the question was, where's the official version? What is it? It was only when the Kane-Hamilton Commission came out with their exercise in creative writing that there then became a text that you could be kept to, although, as I said, in the meantime, both Kane and Hamilton and James Farmer, I think his name is, the counsel of the commission, have repudiated the work, that it was based on perjury by the main
That's not true.
authors. No, they've said it's profoundly flawed because the timelines are all fake when compared to the Needs tape. So it seems to me you're dealing there with a civic mystery religion, which is not good in a secular democracy.
In order to comply with time constraints, I'm going to take two more questions. I'd like to take one from each side of the room. I'm going to exercise a little, because these things tend to be dominated by men. If there are women who have not asked a question, I'd like to exercise a little authority on their behalf. So there's a woman on this side, and then I'll take the two together, and then somebody from this side of the room. Yes, sir, in the tweed jacket, if that's okay. And then ask them together, and we'll give both Jonathan and Warren a final statement. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm definitely not a 9/11 conspiracy theorist or believer at all. But Mr. Kaye, my concern is that to say that these things can't happen in a free and open society is, it feels so many times in the past we've been naive to think that things didn't happen in our name in a free and open society like the United Fruit Company backed by the United States government in Guatemala, staging, atrocities, where the President Allende in Chile was assassinated. And in a free and open society of ours, those things happened. And yes, they were exposed, but not in some cases for many years, and they were excused. And so, while I really would love to believe that in our free and open society, it's enough that journalists are writing and that there's people who are aware of things, my concern is that, unfortunately, it's just not the case.
Let me take the other question back to back, and then.
Dr. Tarpley, I'm glad to be the first person tonight to thank you for your 2008 books regarding our current commander and thief, Barack Obama, and in particular your profile of him as a foundation operative, which I think at this point is quite clear, but also your comments on the birther issue. You were one of the, I think, leaders in 2008 around that issue, one of the people in the media giving that issue attention. What is the political fate of the birther issue, if any, in the 2012 campaign?
I would say the importance of it is the following. People that believe the hope and change rhetoric of Obama, the messianic or utopian promises that he made, are now very deeply disappointed. And we're only finding out how far Obama was prepared to go. The revelations now in the past couple of weeks about what Obama was willing to do to you in August of last year in those debt ceiling negotiations. He was willing to sell out Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the entire body of New Deal, New Frontier, and Great Society reforms that the American people depend on, the fruits of centuries of labor struggles and popular democratic struggles. Obama was willing to sell that all down the river, essentially to increase his appeal to those fussy independents that supposedly decide these elections. The question, therefore, is raised of blackmail. Is he blackmailed? Is that one of the reasons that he does what he does? Is that just what he makes up out of his head with his neoliberal ideology and his foundation creed about the bitter clingers out there in blue-collar America? Or is he not blackmailed? And I think that's the question with this the citizenship and the natural-born constitutional provision. I think it remains relevant, but maybe not for the reasons that other people would think. It's the question of, isn't there sort of a consortium to blackmail the president using this and all sorts of people getting what they want? Could even be foreign intelligence agencies. So I think that's bad. Now, before that, you were thanking me for the books about Obama. I hope people would look at them. It seems to me that a lot of them have come true. In particular, the prolongation of the Bush tax cuts, the austerity plan, the Satan sandwich of August, the cuts that were done then in April of last year, and now what we're going to go into now. I think the perspective is very grim. A re-elected Obama might look better than the raving reactionaries on the other side, but look at the tendencies that will then be acted out. And I think that the answer to this is, frankly, in the arena of mass struggle. I was extremely enthusiastic about the occupation of the Wisconsin state capitol in Madison more than a year ago by workers, by real people, then how that went on to Ohio and how it's going on to Michigan. It seems to me that's the real Occupy, although the Occupy in other places has had some kind of a welcome effect.
If I may address the question from this side of the room from the young lady about the role of investigating stuff that goes on in government, the United Fruit Company and all that, I completely agree. I think that's the sort of thing that happens in an open society where you do have a free and independent media that makes those inquiries. It's one of the reasons that I'm so surprised about how antagonistic the people in this room and at many places where I speak are toward the media. Because if you look at, say, the New York Times role in the Pentagon Papers, if you look at the media's role in uncovering the abuses in Vietnam, if you look at what Seymour Hersh has done, My Lai, if you know, Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, they publish their books into a mainstream marketplace. You look at Mother Jones magazine. I mean, all of these are arguably part of the corporate media. And yet, when I'm in rooms like this, people are cheerleading the demise of the corporate media. Do people in this room imagine that blogs and tweeters are going to uncover the kind of abuses that went on back in the day in the United Fruit Company? Drudge Report. You know, you don't investigate stuff by linking to other people's reporting. Sooner or later, when the original reporting goes away, so does our capacity to uncover the kind of abuses you're talking about. So if you really do want to hold government to account, and you really want to make sure those abuses aren't happening, we have to figure out a way to make investigative journalism survive. And I don't think you can simply shout slogans at the corporate media and expect something to replace it that will hold government to account.
I'd like to thank the Spy Museum for its hospitality.
Is there a nonfiction author or book you'd like to see featured